But the U.S. tried to do better. It used heavy bombers and developed them with heavy anti-interceptor machine guns on, they call them super fortresses, yeah? And long-range escort planes. They tried to do daylight precision bombing at the Norden bomb site, but essentially 10 to 30% of those planes got shot down. And after a while, they ran out of targets. And after a while, they joined in these raids. It was argued it was essential for the war effort. Now, it would be a mistake to say it didn't have any effect, but it is hard to measure, and to the extent studies were done, and they were done by the U.S. Air Force's Strategic Bombing Survey, extensive set of histories standing. We pretty much argued that, well, you know, the militarization, mobilization effort in Germany didn't even get started until 42, and it was going, no pun intended, great guns through 44. And they essentially moved a lot of the production for planes and tanks out into the forests and into caves. We didn't know where to bomb. So it ramped up throughout most of 44 while these raids were going on. Now, Speer, in his war diaries, writes that the troops on the Eastern Front were very concerned about their loved ones in places like Berlin that were being bombed. So it had some effect on morale. And, you know, it's hard to, counterfactually, we can both get back to that, it's hard to know how much more production might have been had there been no bomb. You know? But this did not seem to be a silver bullet. It was what you did because that's all you could do. So, onward. Fire bombings of Tokyo. Different theater. Here, you know, there was even more of a desire to settle scores. I mean, there's a PhD to be written in styles of demonizing the enemy. I was raised Jewish, so I've got to demonize the Nazis, right? That's my job. But an argument could be made that the Japanese were worse. There was something almost tribal about the brutality in which they engaged in their treatment of people captured. It's really even worse, if that's possible, than the Nazi treatment. And so, who knows what was going on in the minds of planners, but there wasn't a whole lot of remorse about this. It's not something you read, you know, terrible debates about in the U.S. press. Here again, they had it coming. So this produced quite a lot of injury and devastation. You can see here. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And then, of course, well, why not, right? This makes perfect sense. It's actually a little more efficient, right? Now, at the time, it was argued that this was a military, as was Nagasaki considered a military target. And there's some, you know, there's an argument. I mean, it's not like there's nothing to it. There were military bases and things going on. But essentially, again, they were running out of targets. They had destroyed almost everything that could bomb they thought made sense. There was a list of additional cities. Some were taken off. Kyoto, which was a religious center. Someone who knew something about Japanese culture said, don't. They didn't. But these were early on the list, and so they went after them. And there's a lot of debate as to what the shock value of this was. Now, there are arguments that, well, you know, the shock value of the other bombings was just as great. They didn't need to do this. All this is second guessing, and again, post-ad hoc rationale. We do know that after this bombing of these two cities, Hirohito and the emperor had an understanding. This is it. we were going to sue for peace. The public did not know about what happened here, though. And it can be debated, and it surely is, and I would encourage it to continue to be debated, what the effectiveness of this was. However, I mean, you know, one argument that was made by the Strategic Bombing Survey was that if you just continued what you were doing with regard to naval blockade, you would bring the war to a conclusion without an invasion. Again, how do you prove that? I just don't know. But reasonable men in different, yes.
Did they compare blockade effectiveness, say, to the blockade of St. Petersburg or somewhere?
I don't know about the blockade of St. Petersburg, but
Like if you wanted to measure effectiveness?
I think it was just that they were of the view, the Air Force, Army Air Force analysts, that the blockade was reducing the military capability of the Army that remained to such an extent, and there was increasing starvation. People would say, well, how much more humane is that than bombing people? I guess the rejoinder is, if you're starving, you still have a vote, whereas if you're dead, you don't. You know, I mean, there's a little bit of a moral shading there, I suppose. Anyway, there are books, we have readings. There's a whole study of this. And I think, you know, as this lecture progresses, you'll see that I think that one's worth debating. And I don't mean debating where you know what the answer is, because, like, I don't think there is an answer. But when people say there is, I get nervous. Because that seems to me to be truncating the problem, at the very least. In any case, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki seemed to do one thing, rightly or wrongly. It seemed to vindicate all of the interwar air theory. You know, that all seemed to be right. The bomber will get through. Did it? It will end the war. It seemed to. It will be decisive and destructive. The way it was. So this then leads to, well, how did people think about the nuclear revolution? And what did they do to exploit it? I think the first thing people intuited, I don't know that they explicitly argued, is efficiency. Atlanta, 6 months. Dresden, 2 days. Tokyo, 3 hours. Hiroshima, 1 second. Numbers. Battle of Atlanta, 75,000 troops, 9,000 casualties. Dresden, you needed 1,200 or more bombers, 800 fighters, even lost some bombers in that one. Even lost some bombers in Tokyo. Hiroshima, 1 bomber, no losses. So people saw this as the strategic weapon, the silver bullet, a magical war machine that decides who is on top. Now, if that's the case, really, the revolution is about destroying cities initially. And your ability to destroy cities is a function of how big your bomb is. So it's all about yield initially. And so what you do, yield is the TNT and pounds equivalent of energy released of a nuclear explosion is roughly how it's measured. So, you know, a kiloton is 1,000 tons of TNT equivalent. And so that's how you get, you know, yield figures. And you have kilotons, and if you have a lot of kilotons, you have megatons. Right? Now, this gives you some idea of 41 to 61. Really what's interesting, though, is basically the Grand Slam, which is 44 to 52, which is less than a decade. And you go from 0.01 yield to 10,400 kilotons. That's pretty dramatic. By the way, the Grand Slam was the largest bomb. It was 10 tons, and it was not that commonly used. Now, I'm going to give you some representations of try to get our heads around that jump, because right now it's just numbers, right? Well, it'll still only be numbers later, but let me see if we can visualize better what that means. Okay, that's a red square on 1 ton. That's a red square on 1,000 tons, right? It's more. That's 1 kiloton. That's 1 kiloton. Grand Slam is 10 tons. You can barely see it. Here's 15 kilotons. You can see the comparison. Here's 45 kilotons. That's called the item shot, which is a boosted weapon used some thermonuclear fuel to make the fission more efficient. Then, well, this is a little off, but I don't know, can we adjust this at all? Perhaps we just a little, there we go. Maybe we can move it up just a little bit more. Okay, in any case, what shot is this? Item shot is followed by
Item shot and then IV mic.
item mic. Okay. You can see that when you go to thermonuclear weapons and you go into the megaton range, the jump, you know, from 45 tons goes to 10.4 megatons. I mean, you know, the mind boggles. And then, of course, there's the Russian effort to best us. They had a 100 megaton bomb. They had to detune to 50 because it would blow up the bomber dropping. Yes.
Can you go back 2 slides really quick? So the one that was dropped on, okay, never mind. We're good, thank you.
You got it?
Where did they test Ivy Mike and Tsar Bomba?
Well, the Tsar bomb was tested over Russian airspace, and the Ivy Mike, I believe, was in the Pacific atolls.
They would drop them and they'd detonate them in the air.
Well, I think the first Thermonuclear device was a device, not a bomb. It was based on the ground. It was the size of this building practically. So they didn't airdrop that one.
How much space? I guess I'm trying to think. For Tsar Bomba, like how big is that? How much space does that?
Oh, we're going to show you.
Oh, okay. All right.
We leave nothing to the imagination in my course. First, some logarithmic representations, because I know all of you have been working with logarithmic representations. Anybody know what a logarithm is? Or what logarithmic presentations are? The hand goes up. You're guilty. You must speak. What does that mean?
It's exponentially gets bigger, and then also
Say that slowly so everyone can hear you.
it exponentially gets bigger, and then eventually levels off because that's just how numbers work.
All right. Well, roughly, the point is that you're exponentially increasing from, if you go from 1 to 10, then that hash mark should be just 10. But you'll notice here, it exponentially goes not from 10 to 20, but to 100. Is everybody with me? And instead of going to 200, the next one goes to 1,000 and blah. Okay. This is another way of saying that if you put this on regular paper, not logarithmic paper, the representation of the increase in yields would go up, I don't know, 10 stories or something. We'd have to meet somewhere else to do that presentation. So I thought we'd stay in the room and we'd put it on logarithmic paper. But this does not do justice to how much of a revolution this is, but essentially a 500-pound gravity bomb to the Tsar's bomb is a logarithmic representation like this. Now, because that is abstract, we thought we'd focus on blast effects. Essentially, even 2.5 psi would blow out the glass in a building. 1 psi would do light damage to all structures and to ordinary houses quite a lot. How many people live in a place or have ever lived in a place made of particle board Tyvek plastic siding? By the way, the answer is everyone. At some point. You're in trouble. At 1 psi, you're in trouble. So let's take a look. Here's the capital on a 500-pound bomb, and you'll notice that the furthest ring is 1 psi. So, you know, if you're really an ogre and you want to focus on 2 psi, you're still out that big. You folks have been to the Capitol, seen it? It's big. It's a building with a big dome, right? No dome, not after this. That's a 500-pound bomb. What was dropped during the Second World War? Here is the Grand Slam, a 10-ton bomb. You'll notice that we're now having difficulty moving around the grounds of the Capitol. Here's Hiroshima. Where are we? I guess we're somewhere over here. We're in trouble. Downtown, as we know it, is no more. Even the State Department suffers severely here. Okay, that's 15. Here is the boosted device, which is 50, about twice roughly Nagasaki, and you'll notice that we're now talking about pretty much all of the district. When we go thermonuclear, we're not talking about all the district, we're talking about Silver Spring, Arlington, Falls Church, we're in trouble. And then if you're really on the lunatic fringe and you want to go big, I don't think they militarized the Tsar bomb, so this is really kind of playing fast and loose. But by the way, 10 megatons, yes, that was deployed on both sides. That was in arsenals. But just for laughs and giggles, 50. I mean, my God, you're talking about Gaithersburg. Now, it was because of this kind of bomb that people thought that the Atomic Energy Commission should be located in Greenbelt. That would protect it. The thought of being run by the Atomic Energy Commission after the blast is a little frightening, but anyway, that's what their thinking was when they built it up. Now, I think the yield matter has to be qualified and thought about, and it was. First, it turns out that large explosions that are nuclear, half or more of the energy is deflected away from the plane of the targeted item on the surface. You can, because explosions are spherical. So a lot of this energy has nothing to do with destroying this item. Even if it's an airburst, all of the energy above the plane of the middle of that sphere, explosive energy, is going away. That then led to the following formula, that the lethal area, which is the area affected in the plane of the target, is not arithmetically connected to the yield. It is something more complicated. It has to do with the surface area of the sphere, and so they came up with the following formula. If the yield is y, the lethal area it can impact on the surface plane of the target is to the 2/3 power. Now that is basically the cube root of the yield squared. All right, we'll be taking close notes. Okay, what that means we'll come to shortly, but essentially it's this. If you increase the yield of your weapon 1,000 times, what's the cube root of 1,000? What times itself times itself? Thank you. You saved me a lot of energy. 10. 10 times 10, 100 times 10 is 1,000. That's the cube root of 1,000. You square it, it's 10 times 10. So if you increase the yield of your weapon 1,000 times, the lethal area is only increased 100. Now, there was a fellow who was a sympathizer of Stalin. His name was P.M.S. Blackett, Nobel Prize winning physicist, who pointed this out and a number of other things to minimize what people were saying about the nuclear revolution in 1946. He pointed that out. Ironically, his downplaying of the nuclear threat, he pointed this out that, well, the lethal area doesn't increase arithmetically. He also pointed out something else. If you take small conventional bombs, it takes far less kilotonnage of them to destroy an equivalent amount of lethal area with a nuclear explosive. And so it was pointed out that you can impact a given lethal area with less kilotonnage in the form of small packages. Of course, it requires more weapons. Actually, I'll give you some idea. There you go. This is a representation of that point. And it still uses widely the 2/3. I don't want to go too far into that, but all of this was welled up at the end of the war, and it actually bolstered the civil defense program in the States. I don't know, you folks are probably all too young. I'm old enough to remember actually seeing the Duck and Cover cartoon. I mean, they showed it in school, and we did get underneath the desks. And there were bomb shelters, and not many, but there were. And it was argued in this piece, Survival Under Atomic Attack, that doubling bomb power does not double destruction. If there were a bomb 100 times as powerful, it would reach out only a little more than 4.5, not 100 times as far. This is the same point. And then, you know, beyond 2 miles, you know, practically no deaths. All this sounds like good news except for one thing, a couple of things. They admit in this document that should you happen to be one of the unlucky people right under the bomb, there's practically no hope of living through it. Practically. Let's be blunt, no probability. Now, what does that mean? If you've been studying ancient history and modern history, the one thing that marks progress throughout human history is what? Urbanization. The reason we've been able to figure out how to live better and have museums and symphonies and ballets and all the good stuff is because of the development of cities. They don't do that so much out in Iowa. Yeah? They have to have Grinnell, which is a little city. Yeah? And they fly people in from cities and they have ballets. What you're essentially saying here is you need to hit the countryside. You need to leave the city. That has enormous implications. It reverses human history. So, okay, it may not be the most efficient way to destroy the lethal area, and okay, maybe you can survive too, but this is a big deal. And proof of that is that they had a civil defense program during peacetime. They didn't really do that before the Second World War. And the second proof that this is a big deal is this program went roughly nowhere after a lot of expenditure. People would not get into doing it. Because guess what? We're human. We like living next to one another. Go figure. Cities are neat. Been to New York recently? Still neat. Paris? Very neat. All these places tend to be neat. Not so much when you go out into the countryside. It's a little slower. Okay. Counter-revolution. Another revolution that was not as dramatic as the decade ramp up of yield is this revolution. It's not as dramatic because it didn't have any